Hello and welcome to Who's On Next, the podcast that can save you $3 on your next purchase. Today I have with me a man who's got a wide repertoire of voiceover work, including audiobooks. He is also Marik on Yugioh. He was Kalim in Shaman King. He's been a voice on the 4Kids dub of One Piece. He's been in Pokemon. It is Jonathan Todd Ross.
Hey guys, how's it going?
How are you doing today?
I'm good. I'm doing great. I'm happy to be here with you.
Oh, it's funny enough. It's actually my birthday today as we're recording
Happy
this.
birthday!
Yeah, it's funny enough. It just kind of perfectly lined up that it's my birthday today.
A very happy birthday to you.
Do you have a cameo? I was just like, do you have a cameo?
I do have a cameo.
It's not even an advertisement. I was just
No, I know,
when
but
you did that, I was wondering like, do people ask you to do that?
I have sent people some birthday greetings. I've done the same when I meet people at conventions. And I would also say, some people like reach out to like text me on Cameo, which seems cost inefficient. I'm on most of the other socials. If people ever want to reach out there and save yourself $3 in text, that's okay by me.
Yeah, I always find it weird when I see people who use Cameo for like a period and then they just disappear. Like they just stop using it altogether. I forget who it was, but there was someone I wanted to get like a cameo for my dad, and then he just disappeared off of Cameo around the time I was going to get something for him.
I guess maybe some people get just too overwhelmed by it,
it would be either that, or I think some people just don't get a lot of attention on Cameo. Though I feel like there are some people on there that overprice when I've looked
that's
there.
Certainly the case.
Oh, I've seen some people like not even like voice actors, like celebrities who are charged like $800, and I'm like, Is an $800 cameo from Jamie Kennedy like worth it? Like, do you really think like it makes you question like, are they the ones that put the price in, or is it like their agent or someone else
right,
like thinking what their value as a person is on
right.
Cameo
for the 1 minute message?
So I guess getting this started. So what is it that got you interested in acting?
I like a lot of us. I was a theater kid. So around 9 years old, I just started getting the bug, and I started doing shows, at the high school, and then more and more as I grew up. And then I went to college to study acting, and it wasn't something at the time that I ever even questioned that much. It was something that I was always interested in and excited about, and that I really wanted to do. So it was the shift to voice acting was not something I had ever thought about or planned on. That was a little more happenstance, but no, in terms of acting in general, I was always, like a lot of kids, I was just like, oh, people are applauding for me. This is fantastic.
Let's say it's funny because I feel like I've interviewed quite a few people where they've gotten into voiceover, and it's all like 9 times out of 10 for the people I've spoken to, it was like, oh, it just kind of happened, or like someone came to me with this.
So that's the story for me. And recently, I was at a convention with a few other Yu-Gi-Oh actors, and we were discussing how we're generally in the same age cohort, out in the big bad world as young actors in the early aughts in New York. And one thing that is different now is so many of us were like, oh, I'm going to be a stage actor, or like I'm going to be in musicals, and never thought about voiceover specifically. And I think a lot of people who are into it now, for a great variety of reasons, I think are so much more aware of voice acting as a really fun potential career. And so there are a lot of people that are on some of your favorite shows today that were like fans. Like I know there are people that are on current, iterations of Pokemon or newer Yu-Gi-Ohs that were like Yu-Gi-Oh fans. And I think that's something that's definitely different, because like I had no idea what it was when I got the job. I was just like, oh, sweet, an acting job. And then, of course, I learned to appreciate it over time. But it was a very different entry point than I think younger people who are getting into the field today find themselves.
Oh no, that's kind of the thing with my generation is that it's so interesting seeing the shift where everybody in my age range in like mid to late 20s to early 30s, uh everybody that works in the field was a fan of the thing that
Right.
they were in. Like now it's like, because as a kid, when I've spoken to some people who like grew up in the 80s and the 60s, and well, not the 60s, the 70s, the 80s, the 90s, where like they were fans of it, but it was like now it's everybody online that is into animation, into voice acting, it's like, or they're working on Yu-Gi-Oh, or they're working on Sonic, or they're working on My Little Pony. Like they were all fans of these things.
Right.
Like as kids, like we all had the same things we grew up with, and now we can actually talk to people about the things that we
Right.
grew up with and get jobs because of the things we were fans of.
And it's funny because that did happen for me in a few instances where just I was some small roles on Turtles, and I was some small roles on the Four Kids reboot of GI Joe, and those were the shows that I grew up with.
Oh yeah,
And so like,
I spoke to Mark Thompson, and I had asked
great,
him the same thing because he was on all those things too.
right? And for him also with the Star Wars is like, just like a huge, to be a corner of that universe is, and he's a pretty big corner actually, but it's such an exciting thing to like join that fandom. But like that was certainly wasn't the case for me when I got into voice acting. That it wasn't planned, and it wasn't a direct decision.
Right. Well, I think it's also just everybody now knows about voiceover. Where it's like
Hmm.
25 years ago, I've spoken to some people who they were just like, "Oh, I didn't even know this was a thing," and now, like voice actors are now getting like so much more recognition now. I think
Yeah, it's
comparative to
nuts.
like 25 years
Oh,
ago.
that's absolutely true. And I also think a big part of that, which is, I think, generally a positive thing, is that because you can get a high quality microphone and record in your closet with some moving blankets, even if that's not ideal, like that's like the barrier to entry is a lot lower than it used to be. And probably people would have said the same, about voice acting in the early aughts compared to like the 1980s. Like it's probably always the case where the business changes and shifts and hopefully allows more and more diverse people to get into the field.
Right. Yeah. And I guess what was your first? Because I am having to go off IMDb, so it might not
Mm-hmm.
be 100% accurate with some things. Uh, was Marik the first voice
Ultra
gig, or was there something
Ultra
first?
Ultraman was the first voice
Okay.
gig. And I think it was my first voice gig of any kind. I think it predated any commercial VO work. It definitely was before the audiobooks, and yeah, and it was just one of those things where a friend of a friend of a friend needed to audition like three guys for a job that would happen that day. So it was as simple as I got a call at like 9 a.m. Can you get over to the studio by 11 a.m.? I did. I got the job. I was back in the booth at 1. And half an hour later, I was a voice actor. And what is wild about that is it really was that like few hour period was a like it legitimized me when I would then go to try to get an agent, or because I was a young actor still starting out, where like just that one job opened the doors to doing other voice acting, and even to getting representation, all from just that one half hour of playing a motorcycle riding alien on Ultraman, which is it was a really fun experience. I really enjoyed it, and it was my first experience also with ADR.
Well, with Ultraman, because I assume it wasn't. I assume it was kind of like Power Rangers. Was it a character where the mouth didn't move at all, kind of thing?
No, they were no, no, no. The other characters in the show, yes, but I know my character. I was doing the dub, and it was the old days of where it would be the three beeps, and then you would speak on the fourth beep that wasn't there, and it was a really fun. I remember, when it was in a it wasn't in the Four Kids main studio, even though it was part of that block of shows, and it was a very loose experience. It was very clear that it wasn't a direct translation of what was happening. They had a lot of fun with the writing in the dub. It was, I think, inherently very silly. And then moving over later to Yu-Gi-Oh, where there wasn't really a lot of room for improv or for any sort of there wasn't as much freedom in terms of what you could do with the character or the written word, because it was such a jewel of a property to them in making it. And I don't mean that in a negative way. Like it was just a much more serious environment recording Yu-Gi-Oh than it was Ultraman, which sort of felt like it was wild to go into that studio and then later on see it on TV, because I was like, oh, I didn't know that little studio could do that. I think Ultraman was the first job. Yeah.
Yeah. Which, was that for kids? I assume it was.
It was for kids. And they had farmed out the ADR to another studio.
Because I remember as a kid, I had this old like Sonic X DVD, and I remember there was an Ultraman commercial on it, but I never remembered seeing an Ultraman show on TV, so I didn't know if it was also on for kids, or it might have just been a thing that they had licensed out.
I don't think it was long lasting, but it was in that block.
Okay, here it is. 20. Okay, here it is. 52 episodes, 24 dubbed. That's what it was.
Yeah. When I got to be on at least 2 of them, and I think a few more. And it was fun. It was addictive right from the start, frankly.
Yeah, because the next show I believe was One Piece. I believe, like, again, I'm going off IMDb, and IMDb's kind of inconsistent with dubs versus sub.
The next show for me was the director of Ultraman. There was a shift in directors at Yugioh, and the director from Ultraman came over to direct Yu-Gi-Oh, starting in that second season, and he invited me to come audition, and it was sort of a chaotic process of getting the job and losing the job and getting the job back again and finding the voice, but and then when I did finally get the job and recorded more than one episode, I had no idea that it was going to be first of all, that the show was when I got the job, the first season had been airing, and I had no idea that it was fast becoming a phenomenon and something that I was a part of. And then I also didn't realize that my character was actually going to be a big part of that over the course of the run.
Well, right. Yeah. Cause, season 1 was because I as a man in his late 20s, I was a very big fan of Yu-Gi-Oh as a small child. I still have all the cards. They're in a tin on my bookshelf right now. There's probably like 300 cards in that tin.
Teachers got mad at you. You couldn't bring them to school anymore.
Oh, let me tell you a story about that. So I was the kid in 3rd grade. I advocated for Yu-Gi-Oh cards at my school. And I got them to go through at the school. But what happened was, it was around the time of season 2, maybe early season 3. I had a Slifer the Sky Dragon, which was the big card at the time because it was one of the god cards. And I lost that card at school. And it was a big fiasco. Within 3 weeks, I had advocated for cards at the school. They approved of it. Kids were bringing Yu-Gi-Oh cards to school, and within 3 weeks, that was completely shot down because a kid stole my Slifer card, and we ended up finding it.
Is that kid still out there?
I don't know.
Is he in jail now? Does Facebook tell us that he's in jail?
I don't know who that kid. I don't even know if I found out who the kid was. I just remember one of the teachers found my Slifer card and gave it back to me because they knew I was looking for it. And
have we considered the teacher as the suspect? I think this deserves its whole podcast.
They pinned it on Jimmy. Right. They pinned it on little Jimmy.
Falsely accused of crime he didn't commit.
Yeah, but I remember at that time, that was when the anime was getting massive, was when your character showed up. Because I remember that period of you on Kids WB when the Marik, the whole, like, what, 2 seasons? I think two
Yeah.
seasons of that
I
character.
if I if I recall, it's like technically one season, but it was like 50 episodes of the main Marik arc. So it was spread out over multiple years.
Yeah, because again, I'm using IMDb here because they say 22 episodes overall with Marik where he
That
appeared.
that sounds not accurate, but
That's what I'm
maybe.
saying. I assume that's probably not accurate, but it says something about like 22 episodes.
That sounds shockingly low, but perhaps I am wrong.
Well, I know that there was a period where Marik disappeared, I think,
Uh-huh.
during season 3. It was like the Noah Go Zaburo
Yep.
virtual reality period, because I know he disappeared for a long while during that
Yeah,
period.
Yeah, there's like the side story of Marik just sitting down in Battle City, just like waiting for everyone to come back.
Well, like, are you? I assume you're aware of Yu-Gi-Oh! The Abridged series. I feel like
Yeah.
most people. Yeah, I remember in that they have the joke where he is at a keypad trying to get into the virtual reality thing, and I think they say he's been standing at this keypad for like 2 weeks trying to get in, like something.
It is
Like,
very funny because as a young working actor, I had no idea my character was going to be taking a break, and I really wanted that money. I was like, I was like, oh, so I'll see you next week, and they were like, well, actually,
well, you're gonna be like a year, for like
right, it was
7 months.
yeah,
You're gonna
yeah.
like.
So it was as I felt similarly as a young guy in his 20s who needed to buy more beer that I was like, please, can't I just show up? And they're like, oh, they already made this in Japan. We
Could
don't
you
control
like have me like do a background character, like something?
they did over that period bring me into some other shows to do some smaller roles, but but it was a big bummer for Marik to have that hiatus for me personally.
Well, I guess what is it like now? Because Marik, I'd say I don't know. I'd say Pegasus and Marik are like considered the two best villains on the show to like most people. I don't know like the mass consensus, but I feel like Marik is usually considered the one of, if not the best villain on the show to a lot of people.
Anecdotally, that's what people tell me, but they might just be telling me that. I don't.
I it's I always
I don't
it's
dig down.
it's always Pegasus and Marik. Those are always like the two I see the most. So I guess like what is it like having this character that's like stuck with people for so long?
It's incredible, and I know what's really weird about it is, I recorded this show largely in sweatpants uh, about 20 years ago, and at the time it was great and it was very exciting to understand theoretically that like on any given Saturday morning I could flip on the TV and I would be a cartoon bad guy, which was like the realization of a dream I hadn't known I had, and it was really fun and exciting at the time. And then all these years have gone by, and now I think especially after Marik got his own Funko Pop, that I started being invited to do conventions and starting getting out to meet people. And I think especially for people in your cohort who were that like magic age of, welcoming Yu-Gi-Oh and a number of other, early pioneers of anime in America, that it's really exciting now to meet people and to hear how much the show and how much the character meant to them. And it is weird having that time go by where people weren't excited and now they seem to be, and it's definitely a very neat thing. For a number of reasons.
Well, something I was always curious about with Marik, because you did Marik, because like every character who did the evil version of their character, they did both. They did the normal version and they did the evil version. What was the like? Did they want you to play Yami Marik like with Marik, or did they like want another actor to do it, or like?
They, and again, I say this not in any negative way. They were very, uh, they were always very. Yu-Gi-Oh was clearly very important to them as a company, and everyone treated it, uh, with a lot of respect and attention. But also, there was a very fast pace for which the show was recorded and written, and we were always, when we were in production for it, we were always going. And so I know for me, what was very funny about that, especially being in that era where like I had, not only didn't I know what was happening with the character, like I wouldn't have even been able to really go online and find out what happened to the character, having had it already been done in Japan when I was recording it. So like, it was as simple as I went into a studio one day to record Marik, and they said, "Hold on, something weird is happening today," and they showed me a clip of Yami Marik and the eye bulging out of Marik's head, and they said, "All right, give us something different now. Go." um, and and so it it was not. So Marik was a very painful voice to do physically. It's
it's a very theatrical.
It's theatrical.
Voice.
And it's funny. I love that it's theatrical. I love that if you're going to be a bad guy who is on was on Saturday mornings for a very long time, you want to be someone with an evil laugh. And man, that was I had that. I was overflowing with evil laughter, and it was great. But it was also hard to do. And then they were like, "Give us something double." And then, you said like, "Oh, they do his version and the extra evil version." But it was like going from evil to like more evil. And so the only direction I had to go was something that was more physically painful. So, while they did go to they do have a filter on it.
Yeah, they put like a 3-layered voice filter on it.
And but they did want me to do something different, and we did that over the course of the run for Yami Marik, where it went from like ha 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 ha, and then instead I took it down and a little more guttural to be like ha 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 ha, and it was the only they weren't like go off and think about this for an hour. They were like, "Oh, we'll give you a minute." So it was like a first thought, best thought kind of thing, and and then I was recording multiple episodes of Yami Marik along with regular Marik, and then we arranged it in such a way, because it was difficult to do, and I'm laughing about it, but it was difficult, and they were very respectful of that we would sometimes break it up into either sessions over different days, or sometimes we would do Yami Marik first, because after doing Yami Marik for an hour, it was actually easier to go do regular Marik. It was almost like a vacation to go from that voice to classic Marik.
Right, yeah, and it's something where I've gone back to a lot of things from when I was a kid, like Pokemon, Digimon, Yu-Gi-Oh, like those kind of shows. And even if I think like some shows from when I was a kid don't hold up as well, something I've always loved about Yu-Gi-Oh is that everyone in Yu-Gi-Oh gives like 300%. Yes. with so many characters on that show. Mm-hmm. Like everybody is being as theatrical as possible and yelling and screaming, and everybody is just clearly having so much fun playing those characters on that show.
Oh, it's absolutely true. And I think it was such a great cast, and it's funny because now through conventions I'm actually around them in some ways much more often than when we were recording the show, when sometimes you would see people, when you're going into a session and they're taking off, but like now I get to see them socially a lot more, and it's a really great group, and it is a group of very enthusiastic people, I would say. Yeah. And that's probably true for voice actors in general, but I think everyone took it very seriously, and they had, they knew, like I said, I think there are probably people who are coming into it today who have grown up with the show and with it a certain reverence, and that's not a bad thing. But I think coming in with no expectations and just sort of like going for it also had its benefits.
Right, yeah, because I remember around the time that I think that third season was happening, the movie had also happened at the same time, and it's just kind of because I know that the movie was separate, so it wasn't like attached to your character. It was just treated as its own thing, as most anime movies are. I guess seeing something that you were on become so big they were getting like theatrical movies off of
and
it.
Especially in that era.
Yeah, well, that was an era where like every cartoon and anime show for kids was getting movies. It was like there's a Recess movie. There was, trying to even think, the Wild Thornberries. Pokemon had like 5 movies. There was the Digimon movie. Everybody was getting some kind of theatrical like series finale, or they were getting some basically showing, hey, here's how big this thing has become, where we can put a theatrical release for these characters. Well, and then they had
that was really cool.
They had that Bonds Beyond Time movie, I think, like 12 years ago too, and that was also a limited theatrical run. I guess because after Yu-Gi-Oh, you did a stint on the 4Kids dub of One Piece as Koza. And I guess something, because I remember years ago, I interviewed Erica Schroeder, and she was Luffy on the 4Kids dub. And I guess I'm curious to know how you feel, or like what your opinion is, seeing where, because One Piece has now gotten ungodly massive since the original 4Kids dub, now that the Funimation dub has been going. And I guess, what is it like, even if it was for a brief period on One Piece for a few episodes, I guess, what is it like seeing something like that where it is now?
I think it's pretty incredible. I think, so there's like the main answer, and then there's like the other answer. And the main answer is that just in general, I think to be like, anytime you're even a small part of something that touches so many people, which certainly, with a bigger role on Yu-Gi-Oh, that's usually the thing that people are interested in or they want to talk about. And that, and that I do find it's certainly permeated among, people of a certain age, especially, and that even a lot of people are showing it to their kids or stuff like that. And so, I think, especially because I had this one season role, it was a very cool role. I loved doing it. It was after doing a really painful and evil guy on Yu-Gi-Oh. When I went in and I did Koza, it was like the inverse. It was like a voice that was specifically about like, how do you sound when your throat hurts? It's just like, it was all about like talking down low. And I could go and do like 4 hours of Yu-Gi-Oh and then just take my broken voice into One Piece and do Koza. So the experience of it was really fun. It certainly wasn't anything at the time. If people knew what it was going to become, no one ever told me. It very much felt like this silly pirate show in the corner, but it was notably cool and weird at the time to sit in the booth and record it. So now 1,000 episodes and other dubs later, I'm kind of just happy to have been some small part of it about something that, is clearly such a, massive global property. And so like, that's neat. It's neat to be able to like, when I go to cons and like, 50 people are like Marik, and then 2 people are like Koza, and then there's always one person who's like Wings Club, and you're like, oh, it's the one Wings Club of the weekend. Like that's like, it's really neat. I would say the other thing that I'm finding now is I do have two young children, 5 and almost 10, and they do not care at all about Yu-Gi-Oh. Not even a little bit. They especially for a while were very into Pokemon. Especially my older daughter was super into it and loved the idea that I was on it. But now that I think a lot of her, she hasn't checked out One Piece yet. But I know a lot of friends of hers have, and so there is that thing where like even just being a tiny little part. I mean, it was a bunch of episodes, but like certainly in the sea of over 1,000 episodes, it was pretty minimal. But I know it does feel cool when you get to be the dad who was on One Piece. Even if it was just a little bit, that's still impressive to 10-year-olds.
Yeah.
And I'll take it. That's one of like the great joys of having these shows be around in some fashion all these years later. Is it does get to be a cool job, if not for your kids, for at least for their friends.
And it's like, I don't even know how available the 4Kids dub even is anymore is kind of the other thing. Because I know everything is now the Funimation dub. I don't know how easily accessible the 4Kids dub is anymore. That's kind of the other thing. Because you always see people talk about it because everyone does side-by-side comparisons of like what they did, like what they changed versus what the 4Kids dub changed and things like that. But like, I don't know
where,
if it's even available anymore for purchase. It's just
I have no idea.
Yeah, because I've thought about that, and I'm like, it's so weird to me that there's two dubs. They're both well known in their own regard, though. Again, it depends because 4Kids has always been kind of that company where some people view it as the more infamous dub because of the things that they changed. Which the people at 4Kids has even said, we didn't really have a choice because One Piece isn't really a children's show, and we had to make it a children's show, and like, so we had to edit things out, or we had to change things.
I have one, and you're right, and I know that's like so much had to do with standards and practices, and like,
and also it was owned by Fox,
right? And so there was there were a lot of decisions that were obviously like over our head, certainly as an actor, far over my head.
I interviewed Tara Sands, and I literally showed her images of the changes, and she's like, "I've never seen these before. Well, these are great."
It's so funny. Well, I know my one experience is that Koza, in the original animation, is shot in the face, point blank, with a rifle. And they couldn't show guns on television.
Did they show you that, or did they tell you that, or did you find that out later?
Well, when we were recording it, and it's really brutal. So like when we were recording it was like, oh shit, and they're like, in the cans, they were like, oh no, we have to change that, and I was like, oh okay, and when we went back for later for retakes, they had changed it to the far more acceptable Koza getting shot in the face point blank instead of a rifle with a bow and arrow.
Why would that make it any less worse?
In some aspects,
I would say that's worse
more
to
horrific.
A degree, because you have a blade basically in his head.
If you gave me a choice, which way I'm going to go out, I think I wouldn't want the bow and arrow. Seems pretty gruesome.
Well, because
they're both gruesome, but like, so it was one of those things where like wild to see like the thing that got approved was still absolutely horrific.
Oh, it's like the whole thing. It's like the G.I. Joe argument of like, oh, they can't use guns because guns are deadly. Give them lasers. Like lasers are less deadly somehow. Well, it's like, I remember with One Piece, one of the most infamous ones was Nami's like not mother, but like kind of like adopted mother. She gets shot point blank by the villain in the arc that she's introduced in, and in the 4Kids dub they change it where, oh, she gets sent to a prison ship and you never see her again. And I'm like, I don't even, because I know a lot of people are critical of that, and I can understand that as a purist. Like, if you want to watch it the traditional way, I'm like, I don't want to give them shit because they were put in a situation that, because I know the 4Kids people have even said they didn't 100% really want One Piece, but it was a package deal with another thing that they bought. And it's like, I can't really give them shit because they were put in a position that they didn't really want to be in with a show that was not made for children. So they had to edit it down like severely so children could watch it.
You know, and I would make the argument I would make is that it was probably the prominent place that a lot of these shows had in the 4Kids era on Saturday mornings has a lot to do with the explosive growth of anime in America.
Oh yeah.
And that you know, like this is me wish casting, but like I do have these thoughts where I'm like, maybe we should just re-record, you know, let's re-record the OG Yu-Gi-Oh! That would be fun, and like do it, you know, for an audience that has grown up with it and can handle some darker themes. You know, but certainly at the time, I think, you know, I just I was recently talking to some real anime super fans, and like, you know, it was still, you know, even in the early aughts, it was still the era in America of like Betamax tapes being like passed around among like anime super fans to get like the real good stuff from Japan. And you know, certainly I think shows like Pokemon and Yu-Gi-Oh! And Digimon, all those are what, and the fact that they were accessible in the way that they were accessible, meaning the parents weren't watching what their kids were doing. They're like, yeah, it's on Saturday mornings, I'm sure it's fine. That I do think that you can draw a straight line to like, you know, when you think of proper, even things that are now produced here, that, you know, certainly rise to the level of, you know, of high art, is probably due to the wide popularity of a lot of these shows for kids, for FOR children in, you know, in that era.
Right.
That's always what I, you know, and especially when people would be frustrated about, you know, about how their, you know, these, you know, stories that they loved were either watered down, so to speak, or modified. That I think probably anime fans really won in the end either way.
Well, yeah, because it's how often does a show get dubbed and then another company picks it up and then they make it as faithful as possible,
right?
And it's still going 1,000, like 1,500 episodes later. Because I remember Yu-Gi-Oh for the most, I mean, I know they changed things with Yu-Gi-Oh obviously because Yu-Gi-Oh was also geared towards children for the most part, but Yu-Gi-Oh for the, like, it was kept in, like, enough was kept intact for Yu-Gi-Oh where, like, I don't think a lot of the changes are distracting for the most part with Yu-Gi-Oh, because you know the Shadow Realm thing, right? Obviously.
Sure.
Yeah, that was made up for 4Kids.
Right.
Yeah, because I know in the original it was like, no, they die. That, right. Like, it was, you will die if you lose this match, and they had to make the Shadow Realm a thing, which now that's a pop culture thing, is
right.
You go to the Shadow Realm, like, and now that's become like a whole pop culture, like, internet meme as in and of itself, which I think the Shadow Realm is just a very funny, it's, the Shadow Realm to me, I just think it sounds cool. Like, I don't know. It
does sound cool.
Like, to me, I just think the term the Shadow Realm just sounds cool to me. I guess with another big thing, because there was Pokemon, and you actually got to do a voice for a couple of you were mostly human characters, but you did do a couple. You were Trubbish.
Later on, especially, I got to do Trubbish. I know my children's favorite was Prince Pumpkaboo.
Prince Pumpkaboo.
Yeah, and that's that thing where, like, as much time as I got to spend with Marik, like, my kids are like, no, Prince Pumpkaboo's the real one. Pumpkaboo. They're like, Daddy, do Pumpkaboo. So that's fine, and like that, you know, that's another one where, like, just to be a small part of, you know, something so big is very fun.
Right. I guess I always love talking to people who've worked on Pokemon, especially if they've played a Pokemon. Where I guess what is the major direction for when you have to just say one word over and over,
It's
basically?
it's funny. It's especially it's like an acting school exercise. Where it's like, how can you convey emotion by using what amounts to a nonsense word? And it did feel like uh, like a experiment in, freshman year acting class where you're like, how can you communicate you love someone with, only using your elbow? Um, and that's what it was like doing, playing an actual Pokemon, where, cause like, and sometimes there weren't even, like, it was, they would tell you the rules of playing a Pokemon, which is you could use any of the syllables, but nothing more than that. And then, and of course it had to match the lip flap, but, it was fun. Uh, it's sort of playing a actual Pokemon is kind of why you want to do the job. Like, just to get to do like a weird, silly voice and have fun and mess around, and it feels very low stakes. No, when you do like a weird, silly voice, it's hard for someone to tell you you're doing it wrong. So that was what was always fun about that.
Oh, I remember years ago I spoke to Tara Sands and she plays Bulbasaur, and I just remember her talking about how, sometimes they would use like recordings of me when I wasn't there, and I just remember her telling me the story of she was in London and she found a Bulbasaur plush that was like a squid, like you squeeze it and it like says the name, and I remember she like said she found this Bulbasaur plush and she was just like, I never recorded for this. Where the hell did this thing come from? Like,
I'm sure they're not the best contracts. But yeah, it's it's fun, and then once your voice is out there, it's out there forever.
oh, I've always said if I Pokemon is one of those things where I don't want to be a human. If I ever was on Pokemon, I would want to be a Pokemon. I would much rather be a Pokemon than be a human character on Pokemon, because I just think that'd be so much more fun.
It was fun. It really is. It's it's definitely the prime job.
Well, it was like one of the first voices I learned, because as a kid, because I do voice work myself, and one of the first voices I like mimicked as a kid was Meowth. Was Maddie Blaustein's Meowth was like one of the first things I ever learned how to mimic, and that was just one of those things where I'm like, if I could ever play a character that's a character
Right.
I would want to play, is that kind of character, or again, even just getting paid to just go Babatar.
Right.
Like that to say I got paid to say the same word over and over and over and over, basically, would just be such a fun one. Also, just having grown up with Pokemon since I was like, God, 3. I was playing Pokemon when I was like 4 years old. Because my parents have told me I had an absurdly high reading level when I was very, very young. So I could actually play Pokemon on the Game Boy when I was like 4 years old.
Nice, and you can understand the rules.
I could actually comprehend what I was reading at 4 years old.
I'm old now, and I would try to play with my daughter, and I would have no idea what was happening. It was like, no, Daddy, you're don't. And then she stopped wanting to play with me. But I tried. Same with Yu-Gi-Oh. I never had any idea what was.
Yu-Gi-Oh's also gotten to a point where it's so.
I know, but even back then, I would try to. Someone was like, "Oh, I'm going to teach you," and I'm like, you've lost me.
I had a DVD, which it might be a rare DVD now. I don't know, but it's Yugi and Joey, like actually Dan Green and Wayne in character explaining the rules of Yu-Gi-Oh for 15 minutes on a DVD.
That's funny.
And it's fantastic. They are in character explaining the rules of Yu-Gi-Oh
That's great.
on a DVD. And maybe it's a rare DVD now. I don't know. I just remember my dad one day was like, "Hey, I bought you this DVD." Because I just collected the cards for a long time. I
Mm-hmm.
didn't actually play it. It was the same with Pokemon. I collected the cards, never
Mm-hmm.
played it, and I still never played the Pokemon trading card
Right.
game because I don't know anybody that played the Pokemon trading
Mm-hmm.
card game.
Probably the key to in a lot of ways to their success is those cards were fun to just have.
Yeah. Well, it's the same
Mm-hmm.
thing with like I assume like baseball cards for some
Mm-hmm.
people or things like that. It's just you want to collect the cards. It's not like you want to actually play with them or use them kind of
Mm-hmm.
thing. Because I know that there is a market for the trading card, like actually playing the game, but most people I
Mm-hmm.
know just collect the cards because that's where a lot of the value is just
Right.
having the cards.
Right.
And I guess something else I was curious about is Shaman King. Like, I did not watch Shaman King, so I do not know. Is it Kalim? Kalim?
They had me do Kalim.
Kalim. Well, I didn't know how. I was saying I didn't know how to pronounce the name because I haven't seen Shaman King. But
Mm-hmm.
I was going to ask. They did the revival a few years ago, and they had you come back to play that character.
Mm-hmm.
And I guess what was it like coming back nearly 20 years later to play this character again
So
in a more straight version of the show?
So one, it was a really neat experience. I had not done anime in quite some time when they asked me to do it. And so, and then the other part of that is it was during prime pandemic, so it was also weird doing it from my home studio, where I had been doing mostly audiobooks, and the it was neat. I mean, it's the concept of the show was cool. Uh, I thought it was really well done, and the one thing I would say about it is that especially with especially on shows where you didn't have like a huge part, even if you were on a bunch of episodes, where like it would maybe only take you cumulatively like an hour and a half, maybe 3-4 hours total. Certainly that was the case with doing the reboot. It was only like 4 hours of work. So what was funny is that like I had very little memory of recording it in the first place. Certainly compared to some other shows where I would have a small part. I really didn't remember much of the original. So it was, they were playing me the voice I did from 20 years ago for me to replicate it, decades later. And that's what's so funny often about these shows is that the time you spend with it as a performer is sometimes very minimal compared to the time someone who is a fan and watches the show multiple times might spend with it themselves. So it was fun coming back. It was fun being a part of it. Um, I, and I guess that's the end of that sentence. Like it was just really neat, and it made it. The thing it did is that I hadn't done anime in so long, and it was like, oh man, uh, this is really fun. I really missed doing this. So while I haven't pursued other anime projects, it and it was also around the time where I was starting to do conventions more. It did remind me of just how much I like being in those worlds.
Right, yeah, because I mean, I know it's one of those things now because I know there's with what they're doing in New York, they're doing a lot of crossover now with Texas. I know they're doing a lot of mixed cast projects with the New York voiceover scene and the Texas voiceover scene now,
Mm-hmm.
which I've found really fascinating that they've been doing that now. I think like 10 years
Mm-hmm.
they've been doing that now, which is really cool to see a lot of the I guess the Four Kids alum mixed
Mm-hmm.
with the Funimation
Right.
people, which is also just
Mm-hmm.
really cool to see that transition
Right.
from the mid 2000s to where we are now in the 2020s and the 2010s.
Mm-hmm.
It's also just seeing how big the anime industry has gotten
Oh,
comparative
sure.
since then.
Mm-hmm. Where it was so, nestled into one place, and now there are a number of centers that are doing it. And then, like during Shaman King, where I think the production there was out of L.A. and I was in my sweatpants in my basement. Like, it's still just weird and wonderful what like people can do nowadays with all that.
And I guess what I was going to ask was audiobooks, because you
Hmm.
have a very extensive, like what do you call it? Not a filmography. What do you call it for an audiobook?
I don't library
A
maybe I don't know.
bibliography,
A bibliography.
a bibliography of audiobooks.
Hmm.
And I guess what was it that started that?
Honestly, I do think it had a lot to do with the animation background. That the first books I did were middle grade. So for like 8 to 12, which was a similar audience, and a lot of those books were obviously not similar in tone, but similarly heightened. Big characters, sort of big voices, and that's so my entree into it was sort of from that side. Even years later, and I do a blend of fiction and nonfiction. That all this time later, I think the thing that's similar about it is like I'm about to start sometime next month a fantasy book, and it is like here are 20 to 30 bigger than life characters, and they're all supposed to sound different, and no one's giving you direction, really. Now go. And so in that sense, it's the transition from one to the other was pretty smooth. I was a huge reader in my personal life, and of all different types of books, and now that gets to be my professional life. But certainly the entry point in there was just, I think, because I had some facility with being able to do, big voices and big characters. And then, of course, over time, I was able to do a number of different genres that don't quite rely on those skills. But that was certainly what I think brought me in. And it wasn't something, like a lot of things, it wasn't something where I had planned to have audiobooks as a piece of the career, let alone what it ended up becoming, which is, my full-time job. But, certainly it's a very different recording style. It's a very different pace. It's very rare. It happens, but it's very rare that someone needs that audiobook now. So you have deadlines, but usually it's like pretty relaxed. And you're mostly I like working with other people, but it is true that you're mostly just in a little box all by yourself, for hours and hours and hours, reading.
Yeah, because I've interviewed a couple people who've done
Hmm.
extensive audiobooks. Man, he'd passed a guy I interviewed a couple years ago. He had passed away last year. He had told me about how it just, I think it's like he said, it sometimes depended even on if you would get any direction with
Hmm.
audiobooks,
Oh,
which
sure.
I guess what is like, is it intimidating having
To
to do that?
to not have direction or have
To not
direction.
have direction.
I don't want to. Yeah, I don't want to. I don't want to. I don't mean political in like a partisan sense, but in a. It seems like a fraught thing that the industry has moved from studios into people's homes largely. They still do stuff in studio. They still have directors for a lot of books. I'm usually do between 50 and 60 books a year. I maybe have a director for one. When I started doing home records, when I started doing only home records, was the pandemic, and I was doing like 40% home, 60% in studio before then. And for me, I am I the reason I like doing it all by myself is because I'll record during the day, and then I get to be with my kids, and then my kids go to bed, and I go back to work. Which you can't necessarily do if you're another person is working with you.
Right.
And by the time I started doing self records, I think I had like at least 250 titles with a director already under my belt. So I was an experienced narrator by the time I had to start narrating solo. So now it's fun. Now it's not, no, it's not intimidating. Every once in a while, I might send a producer a clip if they're a little unsure about tone, just to make sure I'm on the right track. But mostly that's not requested. It's not necessary. They give you a book, you send back the audio files. I do think it's a problem in the industry, and and I know a lot of people listening might be interested in audiobooks, and some might not care at all. But I actually think this is true across many fields where it's easy to cut the cost of someone who's going to train people to do a good job. And that seems really short sighted. And so I know audiobook narrators who are newer to the industry. Like I just had a friend who was doing, she had done like 20 fiction, 20 novels. And she was doing her first nonfiction. And she was like, what do I do? And it's like, yeah, I understand why you're in that position. I heard it. It was fine. It was great even. Uh, but I do think there are a lot of fields that cut out the person who is just there to be like, oh, can you slow down? Can you speed up? And I think that's true in its own way across many fields, both artistic and non-artistic. And I think we're probably going to regret it at some point.
Well, I guess are audiobooks primarily like at your own pace with how
Yeah.
there's not like a set time limit, like no, you need to be under like 7 hours for
No,
like how
not at
long
all.
this needs to be and
Not at
things like
all.
that.
And again, like I'm sure people writing reviews on Audible probably quibble in both directions, like too fast, too slow. Audiobooks are funny that way. We're like, uh, it's very one. Maybe it's true for some narrators, but I think it's very rare that you get like universal acclaim. And it is very funny to read like 5 reviews where it was like great narration, and then one where it's like really upset about something you did. And I think it's a lot about probably has to do. I'm not a therapist, but it probably has a lot to do with you know people's parents reading to them during their childhood, is my guess, about like how you want to hear a book. I know when I would read to one of my daughters, is like when she was young, she was like, "Daddy, no funny voices." I was like, "Kid, people pay me money for the funny voices. No funny voices, Daddy." But I also think that at this point in my career, it's built in. But I do think for people that are newer to the industry, like there isn't someone telling them whether it sounds listenable or not. So I do think that's I don't think it's a problem for me. It might be a problem if I'm not someone's cup of tea, but I don't think that's a flaw in. I think that's just like a bad date. It's not and it wouldn't be an issue with, and I think that's probably true for most experienced narrators, where it's like you know what you're doing by now. I love when I get to work with a narrator, when I get to work with a director, and they tell me when they want me to change something. I still welcome those opportunities to learn and get better. But I do think that people who are only like 10 books deep aren't necessarily getting the benefit of someone telling them to slow down or to speed up or to improve their diction, or maybe to loosen up their diction. Like it's a weird thing to have a soapbox for, but this is this is my political platform. Is we need more people in mentoring positions across all industries.
So it's not like, if you jump into audiobooks, it's not really something where you can just like go to a director or things like that primarily.
I think major publishers will probably, on your first few audiobooks, will probably get a director for you if you are a aspiring audiobook narrator. I think when you're doing something like ACX, where you're applying for jobs direct from authors, you're kind of left to your own devices. And then you're left to your own devices when you record them as well. But yeah, you're not, for me at this stage, I think, again, just because it impacts my ability to pick up my kids after school, Like I wouldn't, if a studio wants me to work with a director, or occasionally a publisher wants me to come in on site and record it in their facility, which is certainly fancier than mine. I'm happy to do it, but I think like most people, I'm just like a guy in a box with a microphone, left to his own devices about how fast or slow this book should be.
Well, because like audiobooks has always been the one thing in the voiceover industry where I don't really know a lot of how it works. Because I've interviewed people who do it, but it's something where I've never really, because I don't hear people talk about it that much, and it's not something when people go to cons. I don't hear people talk about the audiobook work normally when at conventions.
No,
or
it's
things
although
like
I will
that.
say it's every once in a while we go on a tangent, and I think because it's more current for me too. Like I have a lot of I have a lot of passionate feelings about it. Um, but it's a really fun, weird world, and I hope that people continue to want to listen to human voices. Is sort of my big hope for that. So far, so good, but we'll see. Certainly, the, AI is a big worry about for the actors in the industry. Currently, it's not cost effective, and publishers don't feel like doing it either. Publishers would rather hire, so you were saying like the way it works. The way it works for me is that publishers email me and they say, "Do you want to do this book?" And 99 times out of 100 times, probably even more, I say, "Yeah, sure, sounds good." Um, and then I do the book, and I recorded it in my box, and I send back the files, and then they send me a list of all the things I messed up, and then I record those things, and then I send those back in, and then it's done. Um, I think there's a world beyond the major publishers for aspiring audiobook narrators, sites like acx.com or ahab and ahab.com or ahab.us, and a whole bunch of other. Some of it's from major publishers that they have their own. I think because there are a lot of books that appropriately, you can't, within the casting director's roles, Rolodexes. If no one has a Rolodex anymore. I mean roles as in they're roles of people, not roles for actors.
Their binder of names.
Their binder of names. That like they don't always have like a 60-year-old Filipino woman to narrate the 60-year-old Filipino perspective in that book. And a lot of those sites are, especially a site like Ahab, is really good for those things for people who are starting out. Um, uh, but so for me, there are a lot of me's out there. So mostly for that, they just email me and ask me if I want to do a book. Um, but for aspiring people, I think ACX is a really good place to start if you don't already know about it. And that's where you just get to audition for books from usually direct from authors, that they're matching authors with.
Oh, so the author actually seeks you out with
Yeah,
those things.
and it's sort of a clearinghouse to be able to make sure that everyone gets paid and that there's that everyone's treated appropriately. Um, and I'm really encouraging of that because honestly, those are the jobs that would be the first ones to go to a robot. And I want to delay that as long as we can.
And yeah, I mean, the AI argument has already been something. Audiobooks are kind of something where I just would be kind of worried, like specifically would be one of the easiest things for AI to be
So
used on.
here's yes, but also uh, here's the one thing that people aren't. So first off, right now it's actually not cost effective at all. Um, but the other part about that is even if it's really good, I think people don't understand that what's really good for 5 minutes isn't good for 8 hours. And that I do think that as much as it, and like, I know there's some AI audiobooks out there, and maybe people have enjoyed them, but I do think that there is,
I just think it would just be boring to listen to for
that's the
that
thing.
long.
I actually think that it's a much bigger uncanny valley for an 8 hour audiobook than it is for like when you listen to a sample and you're like, oh, it sounds pretty good. Like that there's a really big difference there. And so, yeah, I'm worried, but I want to fight it off as long as I can. Let's get robots handling diseases and climate change. That's that's what I want from my robots.
That or some actual AI voice
Yeah.
regulation.
Yeah, that would be ideal. And it is true that actually in the audiobook industry was earlier than other parts of the Screen Actors as the SAG-AFTRA union in bringing protections to the major publishers. So so far we're okay, but obviously I'm nervous, as we all are.
So I guess final question would be, what would you say to somebody who has an interest in doing voiceover?
I think, I think it's incredibly fun, and I think I think from a creative standpoint, I think there are lots of things that you can do. You can listen to voices. You can learn about, the performers. You can learn the practical and technical techniques, either by some great resources online or from, tons of people, including some of your favorite voice actors, not me, other favorites of yours, teach some really great classes. That usually, if you just go to like their website, they have information about them. And I think probably a lot of them are no longer based out. There are probably a lot that happen online because some technology is wonderful. So I think learning about it and getting better and from a creative standpoint, I would say just always feeling the freedom to be silly in like thinking of voices and not being afraid to look ridiculous, I think is probably something that a lot of voiceover actors have in common. It can be exhausting when you're in a room with all of us at once, I'm sure, but also it's very fun and like it's a fun environment to be around people like that. From a professional standpoint, I think it's a lot harder than maybe people understand, and I think it's probably harder in some ways now to start out and sustain a career than it seems. And I think that I think probably a full-time career. I'm so lucky that I landed a full-time career as an audiobook narrator, but also I've been doing it for 17 years, and I'm worried robots are going to take my job. So like, you want to consider that too. That it's that the same thing that makes doing voiceovers really accessible to so many more kinds of people, that there are no longer as many financial barriers. There are no longer as many barriers to race and gender. That there would have been when I was starting out 20 years ago, and it was like people were just working with their friends, and their friends usually looked like them, and that's how that isn't necessarily the case as frequently anymore. That you can do it, and you can do it from everywhere, and there are so many great online resources to start out. And I just think the flip side of that is just understanding that, like any profession, but especially a creative profession, it's really hard. And I don't mean that as a challenge, like you got to be ready for it to be hard. I mean, like, no, you have to be ready to, make some choices and make some sacrifices so that you can do those fun times. That's, and that's, I think, the case in any creative endeavor, that you don't, if you don't set your sights on being famous, set your sights on being good. And frankly, that was advice that I wish I'd followed 20 years ago in a lot of avenues of my life. But it's certainly it's truer today than ever that like, I think if you just want to get better and you want to get good at it and you want to listen to people and you want to learn, that you are going to find that some of those other good things will come.